take a look at what happened.
Former President Trump is speaking out for the first time since surviving an attempted assassination during a campaign rally in Pennsylvania on Saturday. "I'm supposed to be dead." Those were Trump's words to reporters as he headed to the Republican National Convention, which begins today in Milwaukee. The Hill staff writer Cate Martel joins us from the RNC. Cate, these conventions are usually big celebrations. What's the vibe like there as the convention gets underway?
Those are such powerful words that you said from former President Trump. I've covered conventions before, and they tend to be such a total party atmosphere for where politicos, local and national, meet up and, have crazy outfits, alcohol is flowing and everything. But this time, I have to admit, it's a slightly different vibe since the events that happened last Saturday. Republicans here seem a bit on edge. I was actually at the Boston to Milwaukee airport gate yesterday, getting ready to leave. There were a lot of New England Republicans getting ready to board, and they all seemed very much on edge. All of the chatter that I'm hearing is about Saturday's events. And actually, one convention goer saw me take a picture of the gate, which, as you know, is very standard practice. There's a big scene there and a lot of people singing "God Bless America." And he got so uneasy that he came up to me and demanded to know why I was taking a photo and really wanted to know that I was not a heckler. I assured him, deflected, and de-escalated the situation. So it ended up being fine, but I think it really does show you just how tense and how the mood and the vibe in Milwaukee is not the usual vibe of a convention.
Security is always tight around the conventions. What have you seen there on the ground as it gets underway?
The security has been incredibly tight here. You can't even get within a 15 to 20 minute perimeter on foot. You have to have an Uber drop you off about 15, 20 minutes away, and then we have to walk all the way through. You can't go more than a few seconds without running into police officers. There's a lot of Capitol police officers which feel very at home to us that work for the Hill, and they're all incredibly helpful. We're seeing a lot of Secret Service members and a lot of forces on the ground from Milwaukee and state police from Wisconsin. You feel very, very safe here. And to get into the security perimeter, which is incredibly big, you have to go through TSA security of sorts, go through a mag, show everything that you have, just to keep everybody safe. And I will say about the security, so far here, it does feel very safe because of the security. It's unclear what changes they've made since Saturday that were part of Saturday, but Milwaukee so far seems to have a good grasp on how to keep everyone safe in Milwaukee.
In light of what happened over the weekend, do we expect any change to the programming?
Well, there actually is one interesting change that Trump's former rival, Nikki Haley, will actually now be speaking on Tuesday. She had not been slated to speak, and it's a pretty big deal. We've seen a lot of lawmakers and, politicos put away their differences, even a little bit for the time being, because of the events on Saturday. And Nikki Haley is sending a powerful message. Not only is she handing off her delegates to former President Trump, but she will be addressing the convention. That's a major change. Other than that, we haven't heard many major changes to the programming, but we just expect that security will be incredibly tight. And, everything that we had been expected to happen at the convention, Trump will be here. And we do expect them to approve a party platform. That's always one of the big eventful parts of the convention, and that's going to go on just as.
What else are the big things that you're looking for as the convention plays out?
So, Drew, as Republicans will have to look into approving a party platform, what I'm going to be looking out for is, are there any disagreements specifically over abortion? Now, we've been hearing that if there is any drama, it would be over the party platform when it comes to women's reproductive rights. Outside of that, because I would say argue because of the events on Saturday, every delegate I've been talking to so far seems really unified. So I might have said a week ago, I'd be interested to see which delegates are going to defect and, potentially try to put their votes towards somebody else, just not thinking that they could have Trump step aside, but mostly to send a message. Now the message that I'm hearing is that Republicans are united and are trying to lower the temperature in American politics, like President Biden said in his address on Sunday night. So we're not expecting as much drama, but I will be watching out for the party platform to see if there are any twists or turns, particularly when it comes to women's reproductive rights.
And we are expecting the announcement of Trump's vice presidential pick today in Milwaukee. It's been a big secret about who it is. Any indications there on the ground on who the pick might be?
There's so much suspense going on the ground. Anyone you talk to, that is the first question, aside from Saturday, wants to discuss who will be Trump's VP. We are expecting that will come later today. And the top three finalists are Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, and Governor Doug Burgum. Those are the three. And, from people I'm talking to on the ground, I've just heard a lot of speculation, essentially for all three. So there has been reporting that a motorcade or a motorcade of sorts did pick up Senator Vance this morning from his home. So that's some of the buzz around here, but we haven't heard any, official reporting or official confirmation. But everybody is really excited, I think, to hear who that will be later today.
All right. Thank you, Cate Martel.
Thanks, Drew.
The assassination attempt on former President Trump is impacting the presidential race. Democrats and Republicans are calling for a cooling of the rhetoric. Whether or not it will influence voters remains to be seen, but it does seem to have a galvanizing effect on the Republican base. National political reporter Julia Manchester joins us to discuss. Julia, Trump supporters often say they like that he is a fighter. The images of Trump with blood streaks across his face, fists in the air, are everywhere on social media. What impacts are you seeing on the campaigns?
Well, I think it's helping Trump in a way. I mean, obviously, it was very tragic what happened, and we've seen that former President Trump has condemned it, has sent his condolences to the person who was killed at the rally. But we are seeing Republicans really seize on this. I mean, minutes or an hour after the shooting on Saturday, you saw that the National Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, as well as the House Republican campaign arm, were all posting pictures of this image. It seems like this image has become a rallying cry, really, for Republicans and Trump supporters. And we're really seeing it, I think, unify the party. I mean, we've seen, Republicans of all stripes, even Republicans who have been critical of former President Trump, coming out to support him in the wake of this shooting. So it's definitely having that, galvanizing impact we talk about. And I haven't seen fundraising numbers yet, but I would imagine that Trump's fundraising numbers certainly ticked up in the hours or days after the shooting.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and other high-profile Republicans are denouncing political violence and calling for unity. Meanwhile, Senator J.D. Vance, who's been on the short list to be Trump's pick for vice president, said it was the rhetoric of the Biden campaign that led to this assassination attempt. How do you see Republicans crafting their message in the wake of all this?
Yeah, it's interesting because you see J.D. Vance saying that, but actually former President Trump has seemed to maybe tone down his rhetoric in a way since the shooting. He said he essentially tore apart his RNC convention speech in favor of something that was more unifying, and he said he was going to call to unite the country together. And what's even more interesting is that he and President Biden spoke on Saturday evening following the shooting, which I think is a very positive step in the right direction, because we know that these two men, have certainly engaged in this very heated rhetoric. But, I think what you hear a lot of Republicans referring to when they're blaming the Biden campaign for this, and obviously there is no evidence to suggest the Biden campaign was obviously involved in this. It's just not true. But there was a fundraising call that the president was on and recently, and the president talked about wanting to put a bullseye on Trump. So you're hearing some Republicans say that, but in general, I think you've seen a bipartisan chorus, of elected officials coming together to condemn the violence and, call on the nation to really tone down the rhetoric.
Let's talk about how President Biden is handling this situation. Addressing the nation Sunday night, Biden said he had spoken with Trump and is grateful Trump is doing well and recovering. The Biden campaign has also pulled ads off the air. The Biden campaign's angle, though, in this election has been that President Trump, or former President Trump, is a threat to democracy. Will that messaging change?
I'm curious to see if that messaging changes, because immediately after the shooting, you saw Republican strategists, operatives, commentators immediately pointing to that rhetoric and saying that that rhetoric needs to be toned down. But I think it's difficult for the Biden campaign to really change that strategy at this point, because that's really what most of his campaign messaging has been on. It's been on that, zeroing in on Project 2025 and tying holding Trump to Project 2025, but also this issue of abortion. We know that abortion has played very well for Democrats in recent elections. So, in terms of the path forward, I think Democrats are going to tread very, very carefully. Obviously the Biden campaign has suspended its ads. There's not a lot of campaigning going on that side, but I am curious to hear what President Biden has to say, potentially about this. He's sitting down with NBC News to give an interview in the beginning of the week. So I'm curious to see if he gives any clues as to what his campaign messaging could be going forward.
And before this weekend, there was lots of turmoil within the Democratic Party over whether Biden would even remain on the ticket. Has that been settled? Where do Democrats go from here?
In a way, I think this event sort of gave Democrats cover a little bit, because for the last 2 weeks, we were talking about this, quite frankly, disastrous news cycle Biden and Democrats had been in. It was all that we were talking about here in Washington and, quite frankly, across the nation. So we're not talking about it much now. But at the same time, we talked about this unifying, galvanizing effect this is having on Republicans. I think a lot of Democrats saw that image of Trump with his fists in the air, blood on his face, sworn with Secret Service, and essentially said this is going to politically play well for him. So I think Democrats are still feeling a little pessimistic about their chances going forward. And we're seeing, new polling out today that shows, Trump ahead in key swing states, and, other, blue-leaning states like Virginia, for example, we're seeing Biden's lead really start to decrease. So I think President Trump is still very much on the uptick at this moment.
Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is slamming a senior Democrat who is quoted saying the party is resigned to the notion that Trump is going to win the election. It seems this is the vibe among many Democrats, especially when you talk to them in private. What's the reaction to those sentiments?
Look, it certainly is the vibe at this point. There was, before the debate, before Biden's disastrous debate performance, we did see, Trump continuing to build his lead in the polls. He certainly had the momentum. That debate was meant to stop the bleeding for the Biden campaign. I don't think the Biden campaign necessarily thought they could completely right the ship, but, the complete opposite happened. It was a disaster for them. And now with this shooting that's unifying Republicans, with Trump in the middle of the news cycle, he's about to announce his vice presidential pick. That's probably going to give more fuel to Republicans going forward. So for Democrats, it just puts them in this very awkward situation where they're not campaigning for the moment. They're not wanting to attack Trump for the moment, but at the same time, the polls just don't look good for them. And I think there's a real fear among down ballot Democrats, particularly in the House and in state legislatures, that Biden's issues are going to trickle down to them. So that's a big concern as well.
The Secret Service says it will participate in an independent review of the assassination attempt on the former president. The House of Representatives is promising an investigation. How do you expect that all to play out, and do you think there could be changes among Secret Service leadership?
It's very possible. Look, this is the first time in 40 years that we've seen an attempted assassination against a president of the United States, former or current. So this is a very big deal. And just to see some of the video at that rally, prior to the shooting, when there were literally people standing by that house waving to law enforcement saying this person is on the roof, trying to get their attention, and then obviously the person was able to shoot, that definitely does not look good for Secret Service. That being said, though, you've also seen Secret Service being praised for their quick action and, swarming President Trump and, essentially stopping him from potentially getting hit another time. So look, I think there's going to be a lot of reckoning and hand-wringing now, and a lot of scrutiny on the Secret Service, because look, we're living in a time where we're seeing an uptick in political violence. And I think the possibility for something like this happening again, quite frankly, is still, relatively high. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the agency.
Now, despite the lapse in security that allowed the gunman to fire several shots at the former president, most Americans say they do trust the Secret Service to protect presidential candidates. Tell me about this new poll asking Americans about their feelings toward the Secret Service.
Look, I mean, I think this with the poll, you're seeing more Americans essentially, being forced to contend with the Secret Service, and I don't think a lot of Americans in general, have voiced their viewpoints on the agency. I think the agency is really something that has been in the background. I think it's supposed to be obviously in the background to protect the president, protect other elected officials. So, I think now that Americans, because essentially this is taxpayer money at the end of the day. I think now that Americans will, have more of a, they're seeing the failures of this agency, what the failures of the agency, could what that looks like. I think they're going to be voicing their opinions more going forward.
Now, in the wake of the shooting, there are renewed calls for independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to receive Secret Service protection. Kennedy says his previous requests for protection were denied. Will that be reconsidered?
I think it will be reconsidered. Look, Robert F. Kennedy, unfortunately, has a family history of political violence. Obviously, his father, RFK Sr., and his uncle, JFK, were assassinated. So this is a really real thing for him. And now that you're seeing increased threats of political violence against, other presidential candidates, other elected officials, I think Kennedy definitely has that case. And we have to remember, you have members of both parties across the political spectrum who have been victims of political violence. Nancy Pelosi's husband, for example, or that a kidnapping plot against Gretchen Whitmer, Steve Scalise being shot in 2017. So I think there's not only going to be a push so that all major presidential candidates can have this protection, but I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a renewed push for more lawmakers to have this protection going forward, or some sort of protection.
All right, Julia Manchester, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.